What's up? We are here with James Corbett, our first guest on this show, which was a while ago. It was like last year sometime in September or November, whenever it was. But it's awesome to have him back because it's kind of like a reunion week because I just had Guy Evans back earlier this week. So it's fun to have. I feel like I'm making friends through this whole process. So it's cool. I feel like I'm catching up with an old friend. So just want to thank James Corbett for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me on. It is kind of like reaching out to a whole new friend group that you've never met in real life, but they're all out here, and that's part of the joys of becoming a podcaster, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool. You definitely get an excuse to kind of meet a bunch of like-minded people, and it's cool because it's, you know, before it was like a lot of times you were into certain topics or certain subjects, and you might not necessarily have a group of friends to talk about those certain things. So now it's like you can just find them online and whatnot. But we're just talking about before we started recording about how you're the hardest working man on the web, how you just constantly have new videos, and I know you're always doing stuff for the Boiling Frog Post, and then you do your own stuff, and then all the podcasts. Does this ever turn into work, and does the fun factor ever kind of disappear a little bit, or
Yeah, well, I'm not sure fun is the word that I would necessarily use, but I started the website because I felt I had to get my voice out there on some of these issues, and I've certainly accomplished that. So I think that drive, that fundamental drive is still there, and that never really goes away. There are times, for sure, when I would rather be, sleeping or whatever rather than doing this, but I continue to do it because I know it's more important than anything else I could be doing, except, of course, spending time with my family, which I do try to do more and more these days. So it's definitely an important and integral part of my life, and it's not something that I necessarily look at as fun, but sometimes it is fun to talk to old friends and to make new friends online.
Yeah. Well, some subjects I definitely feel are fun to talk about because I think it's almost like, being a detective, and then you're sharing information or you're doing research, and then you're finding more information. There's something exciting about like learning about certain subjects and kind of doing your own research and like putting the pieces together. I can kind of see what a detective, the intrigue he has in his job and wanting to put the pieces together. That part of it is definitely, I find, fun. I mean, it definitely, I think one thing that motivates all of us that are in this world of trying to spread information is, we are motivated by certain issues, and we feel like it's, and I see it in you how passionate you are on all the things you hit on. And same here, like there's definitely issues that I feel like it's important to kind of, do my part in just trying to spark conversation and get some awareness out there. And that alone is motivation. And like you said, it definitely at times feels like, it's hard to keep talking about the same things, or especially when people are very much, we're constantly around people who want to turn off. You had a awesome video recently about the term conspiracy theory and the psychological. It's funny. I just heard a quote that reminded me of that video. It's easier to trick somebody than it is to convince them they're being tricked, and that reminded me of your video because you hit on that. Do you mind expanding on that video a little bit and how I think it's something that anybody who I think tries to talk about certain issues that aren't hit on the mainstream have a problem with trying to get people to listen, and you hit on that perfectly in that video and what possibly psychologically causes it.
Well, thank you for that. I assume you're talking about my recent eye-opener video on cognitive dissonance. And for people who don't know, this is the idea that when you are confronted with something that so completely challenges your worldview, at a fundamental level, you tend to do sort of a psychological maneuver whereby you kind of dismiss the new information. Even if it's factual and verifiable, you will dismiss it rather than confront it head on because it risks really challenging your sense of self, your sense of who you are in the world. And of course, this is something that I'm sure that listeners in your audience will have experienced if they've ever tried to talk to people about some of these types of subjects that we're talking about, when whatever that might be, whatever is classed as conspiracy theory. Oh, you can't talk about that. You're crazy. And it's interesting. I actually just had a very similar experience. I was on another podcast talking about Benghazi and what happened there. And I did a sort of half-hour rundown of all of the facts of what they say happened and then what actually happened, and all putting all of those pieces together. And both of the hosts of the podcast were blown away by the information. They hadn't really followed the story, so they didn't know much of it. And then afterwards, one of the hosts was basically pushing back a little. Well, I don't really believe in this conspiracy stuff. I want to know why. Why would people be motivated to do this? And it's just interesting that it often comes down to the same questions for people. If they're confronted with new facts, they, rather than talk about the facts, rather than talk about the actual evidence that's been presented, people will want to frame it as, oh, this is conspiracy theory, so why should I believe it, kind of thing. And I'm not putting those hosts down at all. I think they did a great interview and were very open and receptive to the information. But I think it just goes to show that there are psychological phenomena at play when we're talking about these things. And the important thing to remember is that it cuts both ways. And it doesn't mean that just because you and I talk about some of these issues that other people call conspiracy theory, that we're immune to it ourselves. Certainly, if people come with new information that challenges our paradigms or our beliefs, we will similarly have to deal with that and try to be aware. I think the only thing we can do is be conscious that we as human beings tend to dismiss information that goes against our worldview out of hand without really considering it. And it's important to really try to consider these issues from all sides and to look at the factual evidence that underlies the theory rather than just the idea of the theory itself.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with not just conspiracy theories, but with almost everything. Like, I know you did an awesome roundtable conversation with Sibel and younger kid Andrew. I say younger just because he's younger than me. I'm not old, but Andrew, who really smart, knowledgeable person, and you guys were talking about the idea of libertarian and anarcho-capitalist and all these different types of philosophy, socialism, and all that stuff, and it's interesting because when you talk to somebody who is a libertarian or is or is a part of the Zeitgeist movement or whatever type of idea that they have or philosophy, it's like once they're stuck in that, once they decide this is the one I agree with, they do the same thing as people do with conspiracy theories. All other things, even if it makes sense, they automatically turn it down, or your mind will just say, I can't agree with them because that goes against what I believe. And so that type of thinking is really, it's not just with conspiracy theories, it's almost with everything. Like, I mean, it's as simple as like being a phone guy. Like, oh, I'm a T-Mobile guy, you're a Verizon guy, so I'm going to be, T-Mobile's better. I'm a Chevy guy, you're a Ford guy. It's like we're constantly, like once we pick a team, it's like what you do is automatically put up boundaries to listening to new facts. That's why even with like any of my point of views or any of my, things I talk about on the show, I'm always saying like none of my ideas are set in stone. I'm always open to new ideas and new facts, and I know that whatever my opinion is at this moment, I could get some new information that could eventually mold my opinion differently. Even I'm an atheist, but I tell I have a friend who's a Catholic and very religious, and I tell him, I'm like, my opinion is not set in stone. I'm an atheist, but I can't say I know I'm right, just like you can't say that that there's, so it's just like I feel like we have to be open to different ideas, and that's how we progress as people. And that's a really interesting conversation. Do you find that that roundtable conversation, is that something that you see a lot too, even with the libertarians and whatever type of philosophy that they have? They seem to automatically just put up walls, even if you took away because the problem with the isms is that it's almost like people don't know exactly what they mean or the philosophies behind them. And admittedly, I don't study them or research them enough, but I know that there's been times where I have researched them and I'm like, that part of that philosophy makes sense, So, but do you feel like we're less likely to agree with it because we pick a side and same type of psychology?
Absolutely. It certainly does cut across all sorts of different fields and things. In fact, the original experiments about cognitive dissonance in 1957 had nothing to do with conspiracy theory or anything of that sort. I believe that the experiment that they used to show the effect involved basically this exceptionally boring experiment that they told these kids that they were doing some cognitive experiment on studying how people learn or something like that, and they just got them to do these exceptionally boring and repetitive tasks. And then after the experiment, they said, hey, well, the person who generally explains this experiment to the next group of people, he's gone. Can you fill in? Can you just tell the next group of people about this experiment? And they, if they agreed, then basically they'd say, well, just tell them it's a fun thing to do. Just assure them. And so then they go into the interview with the next group of people, and of course those are Confederates. Those are not really, they're just actors playing, a role, and so they have to explain to them this repetitive, boring task that they were doing, and say it was a fun thing, and I really enjoyed it. And after that, they give them the survey, and they find that the people who were asked to basically pump up this boring, repetitive task that they secretly hated, they can manage to convince themselves that they actually did enjoy the task more, simply because they were asked. They had to explain it to other people in a way that, it was fun, it was great. So you can actually change your perception of the world just based on that the way that you have to even lie to yourself, basically, in order to lie to other people and lie about the data that you see in the world. So this does cut across all sorts of different fields. And of course, when it comes to something like political ideology, I mean, that's probably one of the things that's almost even more central to the core beliefs of what people are and, what frames their world. So there's going to be some significant problems getting someone to change that perception. And that's ultimately what it's about. I mean, we don't change our worldview at the drop of a hat, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe our worldview should be constructed in a way that it's not just given to blow over at the first sign of resistance, because then we would have absolutely no rudder and we would just be, completely lost. But at the same time, there does have to be change. And that's kind of the part of it that does fascinate me, because obviously I've undergone complete ideological changes throughout my life, and even in the course of the Corbett Report, going from a statist position to a more anarchical or voluntarist position. How does that change occur? Why does it occur? Why does sometimes some arguments slip through and they start to get into your consciousness and they start to change the way you see the world? That's the fascinating part of it. And of course, I don't think there is an easy answer to that, because if you could bottle and sell that process, then you, I guess, could start a religious cult or something and get everyone to come worship you or whatever. But it's a fascinating issue. And again, I think we all have to be aware of how it affects us. I mean, it's not just about other people. That's the way a lot of people like to look at this. This is why this person won't listen to me on this subject. It also affects all of us. And I think we have to be aware of how our psychology is fundamentally set up to provide those firewalls to new ideas. And we have to, at least be aware of that process and make it something that we consciously realize, because then we have a chance of actually breaking down some of those walls when appropriate.
Yeah, and I remember you moderated a debate with Stefan and I forget who was the other person, but yeah,
I believe it was Tim Wilcutts.
Yeah,
I might have his first name wrong, but Wilcutts.
Yeah, and even that debate was it kind of. It didn't work out. Like I was really intrigued with it, but at the end of the day, like both you saw the same issue. Every time the other one made a point, they disregarded and just focused more on winning the debate than they did trying to make sense, and or trying to figure out which philosophy makes more sense. So you even saw it with that, and that's the thing with like debating. Like sometimes people are really good at debating. It doesn't necessarily mean they're making the most sense or their point makes the most sense. So I mean that's the other thing you kind of have to be careful with is that whole debate thing, and sometimes somebody can convince you with something and just because they wanted to debate, but they might not necessarily be right, and it is a different skill, debating and everything else. So is it safe to say that your opinions are still in the progression stages and you haven't really picked the ideology that you think this is the future that would work best?
I would certainly like to think that I'm going through a process of refinement, that I'm getting closer to what is the core ideology that I believe in. I would certainly not say that that's a finished process. I don't think that I've come to the conclusions about everything. There are still things and points that I'm still consciously struggling with, and then there's the other points that I've never considered yet, that I've never even heard of yet, that will come along at some point in the future. And I think that's important because the world is in flux. Things are constantly changing. We have to be ready to at least accept the fact that our ideology might need to be revised at a certain point given new data. And anyone who doesn't admit that is probably someone to be wary of, or someone probably you don't want to be listening to very carefully, because, again, that's someone who's just tricked themselves into believing that they've finally found the bedrock truth and nothing will ever shake them from that. And I think that's the height of intellectual hubris. I mean, how can you possibly say that? All I know is that I've certainly changed my ideology before based on new data and new evidence and new arguments, and I certainly can't say that I won't do it again.
Yeah, yeah, and with that said, like, you being a father, and I know you were a teacher at one time, is that something you worry about with your child? How do you put that, like, me living in America, like, how would, one thing I'm always really worried about, and, like, you know, somebody like you and myself who does a lot of research and always kind of, I guess, seeing the negative in the world, it's kind of scary to put a kid on, you know, on this planet and like have hope that, you know, that they're not going to be brainwashed or influenced by the systems that are designed to kind of just make them a dumb machine that doesn't really do any thinking or has no imagination and stuff like that. And you know, obviously there's people who break through that. I mean, I would like to think that, you know, I did my best to kind of break through that. But you know, is that something that you're afraid of? Is that something you really focus on? You know, what would you say for a parent who says, hey, you know, we have unjustified wars, we have schools that are horrendous and actually suppress kids from using imagination and you know and really are just making these machine-like just consuming zombies with no ability to really think and be creative. What would you say to a parent like that?
Well, I get the concern, certainly, but I think my role as a parent is not to teach my child what to think, but just to teach him how to think. I think that's much, much more important at the end of the day, because, again, I'm not saying that I have, you know, the bedrock truth and that I'm 100% right about everything. Certainly I'm not. But if there's anything that I can pass along to my son, is, I mean, even if I was 100% right about everything, I wouldn't want to just make my child believe that. I want my child to understand why that is. And in order to do that, we have to teach them the cognitive processes by which we arrive at truth. And that, again, only comes from the process of taking in information, vetting that information, comparing it to other sources of information, contextualizing the information, and then trying to produce it or reproduce it in a way that makes sense to you and others. And that's a complicated process, but one that I think we can be modeling with our children from a very early age. My child is not yet communicative. He's just turned 1, so it's maybe a bit early to start with that. But certainly from the time that he's young, I want to address his questions and his curiosity about the world in a way that hopefully will foster that curiosity and also help him to come to an understanding of some of these issues himself. So rather than simply answering a question with a rote answer or saying, you know, because I said so or something of that sort, I want it to be more of a process of teaching him how to find the information and what to do with that information. And that's a process that we can be involved with our children when we're interacting with them, that again will reflect on their other activities. Even if they are going to public schools or whatever it is, they will still be able to use what they're being modeled and taught in those interactions with us in their other aspects of daily life. So I think that that's something positive that we can be doing that is infinitely more useful than simply telling children what to think.
Yeah, I think that whole philosophy of do what I say, not what I do type, you know, it doesn't work, and it doesn't, you know, it doesn't do yourself any good. I think you put it perfectly when you say you have to teach them how to think. I think that, you know, that's something that more and more people do less of, and I think that's something like you said. I mean, if you just teach the simple act of asking questions, and I mean, isn't that how we progress as a species? Is wondering what rubbing two sticks do, and then next thing you know, we have fire and stuff like that. So I think it is important to do that. And I remember Alex Jones once. This was a while ago, but he said something like he was talking to his one. I don't know how many kids he has, but one of his kids, and he was saying that, remember, everybody has an agenda, even me. And I remember just being like, holy shit, how honest he was, you know. And it's just like the idea of like question everything, you know, don't just believe what somebody tells you. And that kind of stuck with me, because I thought that was really important to be that honest with your kids, and to kind of tell them, hey, question everything, even me, you know, because even as parents, it's funny how growing up, how I don't know if you had a similar situation, but I remember growing up just like seeing adults always telling me that they have everything figured out, and no, that's puppy love, and no, you have to get your life together, and this and that. And then I'm like, I become an adult, and I'm just like, holy shit, I'm just as confused as the kids are. Like, I don't have shit figured out, you know. It's just like, so they just keep selling us this illusion that they have everything figured out, so let's look up to them and listen to everything they say. And then you realize like things aren't that simple, and things are way more complicated. And it's hard to ask a kid at 18 if, you know, what he wants to do in college, and you know, for the rest of his life, and which is crazy, because there's people, you know, adults who still don't know what they want to do, you know. And even with you look at like social pressure with marriage and kids. And even though I think the concept of the family is a good thing, because I think you know, it teaches community, and I think that in the world that we live in today, like, we're teaching people to be more cutthroat, like, look after yourself, make money, make profit, and don't worry about anybody else, you know. And I think that, you know, that kind of hurts people, you know. You had that You referenced that documentary. I think I wrote it down somewhere. Children Full of Life, and I started watching some of it, and really intriguing. You know, the whole idea of like teaching kids how to you know, care for one another, and talk about personal situations and stuff like that. And that was really, really intriguing with how it worked so well. But it makes sense, because we're not naturally, you know, designed to sit in a desk and just be machines, you know. So what did you take from that movie? What hit you so you know, and really hit a nerve with you that you're like, wow, you know, this is something I want to, you know, share with people?
Yeah, well, let's just direct people to it once again. It is on YouTube. It's Children Full of Life. I really can't recommend this documentary strongly enough. For me, it was really kind of, I don't want to say life-changing documentary, because I'm not sure exactly what it changed, but it was just such a powerful thing to see an example of an educational system that, as you say, isn't modeled on treating children like robots. It's about drawing them into that sense that they are part of a community, and how do you interact as part of that. And rather than just telling them what to do, the children were encouraged to come to their own conclusions and figure things out for themselves. Again, to watch that process happening, and to see that it's not just a theory, it's something that can actually happen in real life. Again, and it's such an emotionally overwhelming documentary. I mean, I'm not I'm a macho man's man, and I don't break down at things, but I have to admit, I was completely blubbering in tears at parts of that, watching the children talking about the death of their father and their grandma and things like this, and being just so raw and open and honest with it, and then coming together as a class to support each other. Just a beautiful thing to behold. So again, I'm not sure what to take out of that, other than to say that there are educational models that are completely different, 100% different from what we would expect in a classroom environment, that teach children things at a more fundamental level than simply, again, just telling them what to think or how to act in various ways. And it's important to know that exists as a reality, because again, we can talk about these issues about education and things, and it becomes very abstract, and it becomes like we're talking about some kind of theory. We're not. We're talking about real children, real human beings who are again trying to find their way in this world, and there are real things that we can do as responsible adults to model those types of interactions for them. And I agree with what you're saying there. Once you grow up and you realize, well, actually, a lot of adults don't have their stuff together any more than the children do. But at any rate, we do have the experience of having a little bit more time to reflect on things, and to also use our own backgrounds as experience. Whether those backgrounds are happy or traumatic, at any rate, we can learn from them and hopefully pass some of that information on to the next generation as well. So again, all I can say is please watch that documentary, because I guarantee it will be something to at least get you thinking about the ideas and the ways that we can really challenge some of our core beliefs about what an education system would look like, or how it would even function in a society that wasn't so obsessed with simply, just I don't know, regurgitating numbers and dates and things from a textbook. I think education should be more about more than just that.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm example of it because I did awful in school and I barely graduated high school and I mean I was a special ed kid who's now had doctors on my podcast and you know and it's just like and historians and people and people like you, really intelligent people who talk about a lot of subjects. So grades, my point is grades don't dictate your intelligence by any stretch of imagination. So it's, and especially now, and you went to France and did the open source thing and you know conference and I think that's really important. You know, people like Aaron Swartz and a Harvard philosophy teacher Michael Sandel, who put his whole course online. He was one of the first really courses and really like exposed me to philosophy and really I thought it was a great idea. This idea that information should be free and it shouldn't be, you know, how good the information you're getting shouldn't be dictated by how much money your parents made or if they're alumni of a college or whatnot. Because we want to believe that everybody has, you know, the chance to get the same type of education, but a lot of times we don't. Even though like a lot of these colleges, I think that is just a diploma you're paying for, and really it's just like, you know, you get to say, hey, I graduated Harvard. It doesn't necessarily mean your education was any better or any worse, but you know, so it's kind of like just the bragging rights, I would say. But yeah, so all that's really important. I think it's you know, we live in an awesome time where we can share information for free, and we're exposed to more free information than we've ever had, and that's kind of somewhere where we're going. I think we're going in that direction. Where, you know, I remember you talked about I remember once you were talking about people donating money to, I don't know if it was Boiling Frog or to your website, and it's awesome that people donate. But I feel like a lot of websites that get donations, I feel like it gets hard to get people to donate because of the fact that we're so used to free shit. You know, it's like it's probably a issue that, you know, it's like it's good that we have free shit, but then it's hard for somebody like you or somebody else to kind of make a living doing something without advertisements and stuff like that. Is that something that kind of contradicts each other, that you kind of find yourself like, you know, it's good that information's free and I want to give this stuff out for free, but it's also hard to get people to donate when they're so used to free stuff?
Right. Well, yeah, well, thankfully, in my case, it doesn't contradict. I am able to do this full time for a living based on the generosity of the people out there and the subscriptions and donations and DVD sales and what have you that I get. But I understand certainly for a lot of people out there, especially people who are just starting off. I mean, it took me 4 years of completely busting my back and working basically 2 full-time jobs, my real day job of teaching and doing the website as another 5 or 6 or sometimes 8 hours at night. So it took a lot of work to get to where I was able to do this. And unfortunately, that isn't the luxury that a lot of people have based on their family commitments or whatever. So it is a problem, I guess, but it's also, as I say, it's not necessarily contradictory. And I think that what we need is just to understand that there are different models and different ways of looking at it. And to some extent, I think people maybe come in with the expectation that that it won't work. And I say that because I remember vividly several years ago, I was talking to someone about I don't think it was even about my website. I think it was maybe about InfoWars or Alex Jones or something. And I was talking about that model of putting documentaries up online for free and then asking people to buy the DVD if they like it. And the person I was talking to was so overwhelmed by that idea, like he couldn't even understand that as a model. Why would you do that? You put it on the online for free, and from my perspective now, having done the website and put all my interviews and everything up on the online for free, and then ask for people to support me, and actually getting that support, I think that it really is surprising to a lot of people that people really do want to support the quality that comes from, you know, someone who's really seriously dedicated to what they're doing. And I think that is the model that we should be replicating, because it's because the information has to be free ultimately, and it is free. And under the current internet model, I don't think subscription-based, you know, closed paywall systems, I don't think they work. They don't even work for, you know, New York Times or whatever with all of its, you know, millions of readers. How is it going to work for some independent podcaster? And why should it work that way? Intellectual property is a completely, utterly bunk idea, and I've talked about that on my podcast before. But what it does is to create the expectation that information needs to be behind a paywall in order to be supported. And I think that that's fundamentally not the case. And again, I am just one example, and there are others out there of people who are able to do this simply on the generosity of others. So it's a question of changing our expectation, but also I think we have to fundamentally challenge that idea that we need copyright and patent and whatever because otherwise no one will pay for things. People will pay for the expectation that I will produce more in the future, and it's literally a calculation like that for me. If I can't do this for a living, then I won't be able to do it. Therefore, I'll go get a job as a teacher and I'll teach for a living, and I won't do this work. So it is up in the arms of the audience. And I guess at the end of the day, yeah, I'm glad it works out. But if it doesn't, then that's it. I mean, humanity collectively is making a choice right now of what kind of model they want ultimately. And I certainly hope it works out. And so far it's worked out for me. If it doesn't work out in the long run, and if, in the broader sense, if humanity doesn't go towards this model, then I think ultimately we've lost as a species. We've lost the potential of this moment in time. And as you say, we are living through the potential of the internet and this incredible, sharing of information that's possible right now, so that you can literally download a car from open source vehicle, osvehicle.com, or, all these crazy things that are happening right now through collaboration and open source sharing of information. If we lose that, then it's our fault ultimately at the end of the day, because we're making that choice collectively as a society. So I want to stress it that way. I don't think that it's contradictory. I think it's just a question of really living our principles and supporting those who are doing the work that we love. And I really think people genuinely want to do that. It's just a question, of course, at the end of the day, if there's hundreds or thousands of people out there that you want to support, you ultimately have to make your priorities. And I certainly understand that from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I think when people really care about a product or somebody's work, they're gonna they're gonna donate. They're gonna help keep it going. I mean, it's no different than when they thought Napster was gonna ruin the whole music industry, and then they found other ways to supporting the bands. They went to the shows. They bought merchandise. It's the same idea. I think that every time we have a new phase, we always think, oh, this is gonna change everything. It's gonna ruin everything, and then we realize, like, oh no, we find other ways. I mean, the idea of a podcast. I know when I talk to people who aren't familiar with podcasts, surprisingly, there's still many who aren't familiar with podcasts, and they're like, oh, how do you make any money? I'm like, I don't. And I'm like, I actually lose money. I'm like, it's an awful investment in from that standpoint. But I'm like, I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it because I enjoy doing it. And in the future, if I can make a living doing it, then that's great. But if not, then I'm completely okay with doing something that I love. I have a real issue with. I just had Adam Scorgie on, who did the movie The Union, the business behind getting high, and The Culture High. And he was on London Real a while ago. And the one thing that kept stressing on him, it's like, well, that seems like a bad investment. Why would you put out the movie, for free? Or why would you, and I'm just like, and I was talking to Adam, I'm like, why does everything have to, because the guys from London Real, Brian, the host, I believe he was an investment banker. He was in Wall Street in some sense. So everything to him is ones and zeros. And it's just like, it drives me crazy, because I'm like, what actually makes you happy that comes from money? I'm like, experiences make you happy. Work makes you happy. The most motivated people in the world aren't people who are doing it because they're just trying to make more money. They're doing it because they enjoy their work. There's a book called Drive. I forget what the full title is, but like Drive, what really motivates people, or something like that. And it goes with the whole study of that, how money actually isn't the best motivator. I mean, look at Nikola Tesla, a perfect example, of somebody who was motivated because he actually wanted to make a difference in this world and not by money. He sold his patents to whoever it was that just so he could keep going, and so I think that's a huge...
And I think people recognize that too. I mean, that's such an important point, because if I had started the Corbett Report because I thought it was going to be my full-time job and I thought I could make money out of it, I don't think I ever would have made it to where I made it. I did it because I felt I had to do it. I needed to do this. And I did it for years and years without even the expectation that it would ever develop into anything like what it has. And that it did develop into that is awesome and incredible, but I never expected it, and that wasn't what I was working towards. And I contrast that to sometimes I get contacted by people who have just started a website or just started their podcast. I remember there's one podcast I saw, it was maybe their second or third episode, and they were already trying to sell t-shirts and mugs and things. And that type of mentality, if you go into it because you think that you're going to get the that kind of monetary support right off the bat, and people are going to support you. It doesn't work that way, and I don't think it should work that way. I mean, we have to put an investment into it before anyone will take it seriously or care about it. And again, once it is a labor of love, and it is coming from that place, I really do think it will be rewarded in the end. But that should not be the goal. If it comes from that goal of trying to get ones and zeros, then what have you accomplished at the end of the day? I mean, just making money out of it is trivializing the information to a certain extent. And I've always realized that the information that I'm talking about is infinitely more important than myself and what I'm doing individually. It's about the world and what kind of world we want for the future and what kind of historical record we want to leave for the future, because the history of course determines our present and our future, and if we get the history wrong, then everything will end up being wrong. So I mean, if we treat it just as a way of making money, I think the audience will understand that and they will resonate with that, and they will probably reject it. It has to come from a true place, and people recognize that, and I have faith that people out there recognize that when they see it.
Yeah, I was talking to Guy Evans about, he was talking about how corporations getting involved in podcasting, and he's like, now there's all these corporations getting involved, and he's like, it's going to be harder for, smaller people who are doing it for the passion to kind of stick out. And I'm just like, yeah, but just like trends in music, the crappy ones will get big, make some quick money, but they'll disappear, and people will still talk about the good artists that their music will last. And it's same thing with podcasting. I feel like a lot of, as the podcasting trend grows, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be like, oh, this is a great investment to make money. Let's try to get somebody recognizable, a celebrity, but they're not going to last. You're going to realize like, holy shit, like this, they're not passionate about anything. I mean, one thing that attracted me to your show was that you really cared about the issues, and you could tell you really cared, and you're passionate about it, and you're moved by it, and to me that was important. And even with this show, like I've had people who said, oh, one of the reasons why I wanted to come on was because I could tell you were passionate about what you were talking about, and to me that meant a lot, because I'm just like, I'm glad that comes out, because I really am. I think it's important to talk about the whole idea of like we shouldn't talk about religion and politics and blah blah blah, and or in this case what's become one of those conversations is you shouldn't bring up 9/11 because but it's just like all these taboo topics should be talked about, because that's the only way we progress. That's the only way. I feel like it's a really tricky way of getting people to not talk about important issues. Like, oh, let's just watch sports and even though like doing those hobbies and doing getting your therapy and your time away from these issues is important, because you need to clear your mind. I also think that it's important to talk about those issues, and I feel like we're people I have friends that are like, oh, why? Let's talk about something else. Anytime I bring something up and we get in, I have a couple of friends that we love having these conversations, and some of the other friends will be like, why are we talking about this? Let's talk, we're out to have a good time. I'm like, well, I am having a good time. I'm having a good time talking about real issues. Like, I find enjoyment in that. Don't you? Have enjoyment. It's not like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, but there are different people out there. There are people who don't care about this at all. There are people who just don't understand the importance of it. I don't try to make people, believe, oh, please, you have to believe you have to care about what I care about. You have to believe what I believe. That's not what I'm just putting my voice out there. And if people resonate with it, great. If they don't, then that's their own bag, and they can decide that. But just on the issue, I mean, you talk about the corporatization and the celebritization of podcasting, etc. But even then, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be bad content. I mean, you look at someone like Joe Rogan has an excellent podcast that's really thought-provoking and attracts a huge audience, because again, he's doing it because he loves doing it, and you can feel that, you can resonate with that. Even he's putting it out there because it's something that he's genuinely passionate about, and that cuts through all of the celebrity and everything else that surrounds it. Whereas, of course, other celebrities are in it for whatever, quick buck, or to try to make a name or whatever. So, I mean, I think, again, people see authenticity when it's there, and they can see the opposite of authenticity when it's there. And again, I mean, everything that I do is based on just having faith in humanity, because ultimately, I mean, I guess we have two choices. We can either believe that we collectively as a human species are going to move past our petty differences and are going to start forming the society of the future that we need, or we are going to just completely devolve into automatons walking around being colonized in our thoughts and minds, and increasingly even in our genetic structure and everything else by the corporations and people that are seeking to rule over us. And it's a choice that we have to make each and every day, with the choices and of what we do, what we say, what we who we interact with, what kinds of media we consume. I mean, every choice that we make is a choice either to move towards that society that we want, or to just, you know, subsume our consciousness into the hive mind and just be, you know, go along by autopilot. So again, I have to have faith that humanity will make the right decision, because the only alternative is to think that we are basically all automatons and the game is lost and we're all going to end up walking around as robots. And if that's the case, then why are we even here talking? So I guess I'm optimistic. I would like to think that I'm rationally optimistic, because there's no alternative. What is the alternative? It's to just go off and just distract yourself with meaningless entertainment until you die. And I don't like that idea. So I'm here putting my voice out there, trying to make the difference that I can. And I'm only one person, and I take it for what it's worth. I mean, it's just one more node out there, but there are more people turning on to this every day. So I think that's ultimately the hope of all of this.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that it seems like little by little, I know there's probably been many times in the history of the world that people have said, oh, we're in crazy times, you know, this is you know, so different, and we're evolving so quickly. But I really do feel like that we're in some crazy times right now. I think that you know, Moore's law, like technology is evolving so quickly. I think I saw a study that in like 2020 there's going to like 80% of the world's going to have internet access or something insane like that. And so and that means with internet access, that means access to information. Which means that it's going to be harder to bullshit people. It's going to be harder to sell bad information, and you can do your own research and stuff like that. So yeah. I think from that aspect, we are evolving, and I am optimistic because I think that, you know, I think you said on the last time you were on the show, you know, 10 years ago, nobody knew what false flag meant, you know, and now everybody knows what that term means, you know, and 10 years ago, people wouldn't question certain things. Now, every time something happens, people are questioning it. Not necessarily always a good thing, you know, because sometimes you're going to get some bad information, but I'd rather have bad and good information than no information. So I definitely think it's you know, a step in the right direction. Now, you being in Japan, I haven't heard much conversation about Fukushima recently. Any updates on that? Like what you know, what's going on? Because I feel like it's a big fucking issue. I mean, we have polluted, you know, a small part of this earth. We're on this you know, just we only have so much land and places to live, and we're already fucking that up. You know, do you have any updates? Is there any hope?
Well, the best place to go for updates, I would say, is my FukushimaUpdate.com, so people can keep track of that. That's being updated several times a week with some of the latest information. And unfortunately, you know, not all good news, certainly. There's been traces of radiation from Fukushima discovered in West Coast albacore tuna now. So that's been confirmed, and that's only going to continue increasing from here as the kind of wave of radioactive particles and fallout is going to continue hitting the western coast of the United States this year. Basically, it's just starting now, so it's only going to increase from here. And unfortunately, there is no agency of the United States that is actually actively monitoring for radiation levels on the West Coast. So there is a group that that has taken it upon themselves to crowdsource an actual solution to this. It's called Our Radioactive Ocean. They're at ourradioactiveocean.org, and it's the I think the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute is putting this on. And basically, they're crowdsourcing the funds in order to do spot testing in various parts along the West Coast to test for Fukushima radiation. And some of their initial results have come out so far, basically showing that, yes, there are some small detectable levels of Fukushima radiation so far, but they're expecting, again, the main wave to start arriving in later this year. So it's going to be increasingly important to be testing for that for people there in the United States. And of course, the situation at Fukushima is pretty much what it's been for the last couple of years. They're still, of course, continuing to pump water in through the reactor buildings of 1, 2, and 3, where there were complete meltdowns of the reactor cores. They still can't get into to the reactor containment itself to find out where the cores are lying, because there's no technology that exists that can get close enough because it's still that radioactive at this point. And they're still having problems with all of this water that's being pumped through that's radioactive. They're running out of places to store it. They've said that at some point they're just going to have to start dumping it into the ocean wholesale. And of course, some of it is already running into the ocean. There's still hundreds of tons per day that's running off into the ocean. So it's certainly a situation that's still ongoing. There are, I guess, hopeful signs with some of the things. Reactor 4, which a lot of people talked about, there's a spent fuel pool right above the reactor where there's 1,700 or so fuel rods that were being stored. And that was a very big open question since the disaster took place, because the Reactor 4 building has been deformed by the explosions that took place there, and the probability of the building collapsing and all of that radiation being released into the atmosphere has been an ongoing concern. So TEPCO has been removing those rods. They're about, I think, halfway through that removal process now. And so that's, I guess, hopeful. Hopefully they will be able to continue and finally finish that process before there's another major earthquake, although we did just see, I believe, a 6.0 or something along those lines in Tokyo yesterday. So again, I mean, it's a disaster that's continually just sitting there on the edge, because again, another earthquake, another tsunami could happen literally at any time. So the world continues to be held nuclear hostage, again, not just by Fukushima, not just by the other 50 reactors or so that are here in Japan, but of course the similar reactors that are there in the United States, the reactors in France, the reactors all around the world. And I think it's important to realize that this is not just the Japanese issue. It's just that Japan sort of shows what the issue really is. And unfortunately, the world is held nuclear hostage as long as these reactors continue to operate in the way that they do. And it's not a happy situation. But again, I am keeping up to date with this at FukushimaUpdate.com, so I hope people will continue to stay tuned for more information.
Yeah, definitely check that out. And also, what's the incentive of using nuclear power? Because it seems like it's expensive. Obviously, this can happen. To say that there's no other better alternatives, like what's the incentive to spend all this money in developing this?
That's the real question, because it does not make economic sense to have nuclear reactors. The nuclear energy industry in the United States only functions because of heavy government subsidization and tax breaks and all sorts of relief and benefits that the nuclear energy industry gets. That's the only way that reactor operators can make any money out of this. It is not a profitable thing to run nuclear energy. So why do they do it? That is the fundamental question. And there is an answer. The entire nuclear energy industry rose up as an adjunct to the nuclear weapons industry. In order to create the fuel for the nuclear weapons, in order to create plutonium, what's the best way to do that? Well, you have to have some sort of uranium refineries. And how do you refine the uranium? Well, nuclear reactors provide the perfect way of doing that. Really, nuclear power is all about generating material for nuclear weapons. That's why, when they talk about Iran and its possibility of developing a nuclear industry, why they're concerned about that turning into nuclear weapons processing, because that is what nuclear energy is fundamentally about. They are wedded at the hip. And that's the big dirty secret that the nuclear energy industry never wants to talk about. And it's interesting, actually, just after Fukushima happened here, you had the Japanese defense minister at the time came out and admitted that, yes, the nuclear energy industry here in Japan provides weapons-grade plutonium that could be used to make nuclear weapons if Japan ever wanted to do it. And of course, we never would, but we need that option to be that kind of deterrent to China and some of the other threats in this region. And it's interesting that a politician would come out and admit that, but they actually did. And it's one of the rare instances of that. But when you look into the history of how nuclear weapons actually developed and then how the nuclear energy industry developed as a result of that, it's fascinating and quite scary, because of course there are other ways to do nuclear energy. For example, the thorium reactors, which do not operate in the way uranium reactors do, that do not require active cooling, that in the event of an emergency would shut down in a way that would not cause a meltdown. Why aren't we even exploring that type of technology? It's because they want the uranium reactors to create the material for nuclear weapons. So once you start to look into it, the answer is actually very simple and very obvious. It's done as an adjunct to the nuclear weapons industry. That's how it developed. That's the history of it. That's where it is today, and that's why governments spend so much money subsidizing their nuclear power industries. And it's quite disgusting. It's quite disturbing, but that information needs to be more widely known and understood. So in fact, I am actually working behind the scenes on what I think hopefully will become a documentary of sorts on that very subject, looking at kind of the irony of going from, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the only atomic bombings in warfare, to a country that embraced nuclear power to the extent that they end up with Fukushima. And I think there is a direct line that you can draw from one to the other through the historical terms there.
Yeah, I saw a great TED talk about thorium. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but yeah, well, what you said, and it's I remember seeing it, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, why isn't anybody talking about this? Like, it seemed like you said it's safer, it makes more sense, and it just like you said, it usually comes down to ones and zeros. Somebody's making money, or somebody's profiting, or there's some reason behind the scenes. It's never what we're sold, because really, it seems like a pretty obvious question, like, why are we using this when it doesn't seem like there's any even financial gain in developing it? And so that's a really interesting question. I know that you're tight on time, and we went way over the time that you wanted to, but time flies by, obviously, when we're talking. And I apologize I do this with every guest. I tell you what we're going to talk about, and usually never hit any of the topics. So I just go wherever the conversation goes. And I don't ever want to stop that. I just kind of want, but I always feel bad, because I'm like, I hope I don't throw like somebody a curveball and then they're not prepared for it or whatnot. Because usually I'm the one who sounds like an idiot on this show. I don't want any guests to sound. But before I let you go, I know you briefly talked about Benghazi in the beginning of this. My understanding, well, I know why Fox News is talking about it, obviously, because they're just babbling about, the Obama, this and that, like all the things that Obama does wrong, like drones and never shut down Gitmo. The only thing they can talk about is this Benghazi thing, and they're not even getting the facts right. They're just focusing on the fact that the actual phrases or the way they stated it was incorrect. But there's a bigger picture to it. My understanding was that they were using it to fund Al Qaeda or the Syrian rebels or something along those lines, I believe, right?
That's right. And I'll have to be brief because I really do have to get going. But yeah, basically the smoke screen that they're putting up right now is Boehner is starting a select committee investigation into this, and he's going to subpoena Kerry and everything based on the back of some FOIA documents that Judicial Watch received from the State Department that show that Ben Rhodes, who was a communications officer in the National Security Wing of the White House, wrote an email to Ambassador Susan Rice as she was preparing to go on the Sunday morning talk show circuit back after, in the immediate wake of Benghazi Gate. She was going to go on, so he was basically telling her, tell everyone it's about the protests that were happening at the time, about that YouTube video about the Prophet Muhammad. There was a bunch of protests going on in the region. Just say it was about that. When, of course, it wasn't about that. It was a coordinated attack on the U.S. diplomatic mission. That's what they're investigating. That's the big smoke screen, because it makes it into a left-right political issue. The real issue is that Boehner has in fact been covering up the attempts by members of, even Republican members, who have been trying to get a committee investigation into this for over 2 years, based not on that smokescreen, but on the fact that there were CIA personnel swarming all over Benghazi at the time that happened. And what was the CIA doing there? What was their mandate? What was their mission? What was their scope? Why did they have a CIA annex 1 mile away from this diplomatic mission? That's something that the CIA does not want to talk about. In fact, it came out that they were even giving monthly polygraph tests to their CIA personnel who had knowledge of what happened in Benghazi to make sure that they weren't spilling any secrets to the media. Just unprecedented security over this. What's it all about? Well, we can back into this from the testimony of different sources, including Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer and Tosh Plumley, who was a CIA contract pilot, and James and Joanne Moriarty, who were business people who were there in Libya during that time. They all corroborate each other. They are all talking about Ambassador Stevens was killed as part of a coordinated hit. He was taken out because he was going to blow the whistle and testify to Congress about gun running from Benghazi, from Libya to Syria via Turkey and or Jordan and or Pakistan. They've all been mentioned. That was what this was really about. They admit that they were trying to secure the weapons that were floating around there during the Libyan conflict. What that really means is they were trying to secure them and then ship them off to the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Syria so they could help that insurgency. That was the operation that was going on. That's what they're trying to cover up, and that's what this new investigation that Boehner and everyone's talking about is never going to touch with a 100-foot pole, because the Republicans, of course, were briefed on all of this in their own special committees and everything behind the scenes. They're up to it in their eyeballs equally. So it's not a left-right issue. Of course, it's fundamentally about America once again arming and training and funding and equipping the terrorists that they claim to be fighting. And that's the real scandal of Benghazi. That's what is never going to come out in these political investigations. And that's what needs to be explored. There's also another angle to this, which I think is equally fascinating, is that Paula Broadwell, who was the mistress of David Petraeus, the CIA chief, she came out shortly before, just before the whole Petraeus affair became public knowledge. She came out to say, yeah, in Libya, at the Benghazi mission, at the Benghazi CIA annex, they had Libyan militants. They were holding them hostage there as captives or captured militants or whatever. And that's what the attack was about. That's what she was saying it was about, which is interesting because, of course, that brings up the whole issue of CIA black sites. And Obama, the first thing he said when he came into office was, we're going to stop that altogether. We're, of course, not going to operate any CIA black sites. So that would be completely against U.S. policy and U.S. law if that were true. That's something that's never been explored or never been taken up by anyone. The CIA did come out to deny it at the time, but it's never been investigated and never been followed up. So that's just another angle to all of this. What was the CIA doing in Benghazi? That's the central question, and that's the one that no one wants to talk about.
Yeah. And definitely check out James Corbett's website, corbettreport.com. Underneath every video episode of the podcast, I put links to our guests' websites and stuff like that, so definitely check that out. One of my favorite guests, definitely one of my favorite places to get my news. Probably out of all my guests, you're probably the guest I get people asking me the most about. They're like, dude, that James Corbett guy. I'd be like, he's awesome. He's like, he's so knowledgeable. He's like, you know, and people just really, I think that, like we talked about before, you're passionate about what you're talking about. You're well-researched. That's the other thing I tell people. People are always like, oh, what about this alternative news? How do you know they're not trying to sell you agenda? I'm like, listen, you know, of course, people can always get information wrong, but the beautiful thing about James Corbett is you can always count on him to put links to some references. He puts links to stuff. You can do your own research, and I think that's an awesome thing. So, James, I just want to thank you again for being on. It's awesome to have you back, and hopefully we have you back again in the near future. Anything coming up? Well, of course, something's coming up. It's James Corbett. Probably 1,000 things are coming up, so maybe because you're tight on time, I won't have you answer that. But check his website, and again, like I said, he always has new videos coming out, Boiling Frog post stuff, his personal stuff. So, you know, awesome place. And you do New World next week with James Evan Pilato, your buddy who actually was on my show not too long ago, which was awesome. So definitely check his website out. And thanks again, James. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Ricky, and keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks. And I appreciate what you're doing. So the feeling's mutual. Have a good one, James. Keep in touch.
You too.